Well, hey everyone, welcome back to Navigating the Voyage. Again, my name is Cody. I'm pastor of Voyage Church, Montreal, and I'm excited to come in and tackle another question that maybe often doesn't always come up on a Sunday during service. Maybe not in your small group, maybe it does. Oddly, actually, this question comes to us kind of post Sunday. An important question, one that I'm fairly maybe passionate about it. I don't know if I want to say passionate about it, but I'm definitely concerned about it. I think it's a really important question, and it's a post Sunday question. So someone thankfully brave enough to come up after and be like, hey, you said something and I don't know about that. So unfortunately, I couldn't get us. I don't remember exactly which. It was a few months back which sermon this came up on, but the question stuck with me, and the question was, what if I don't feel saved? And the context is I was in the midst of preaching that Sunday, and I was came out and said, like, you need to at some point have an emotional response to being saved. I mean, as a follower of Jesus, as a Christian, if you've been saved, there is some level where that's going to hit you emotionally, and I do believe that. I believe that is true. But then this person who was listening then kind of had that question of, well, if I don't feel saved, am I actually saved? And that's a slightly different question, but they're very close together. So that's a great thing to dive into because, like as I'm saying, yes, there is an emotional link in salvation, but if you don't feel saved, it doesn't mean that you're not saved. You don't have to feel saved because your emotions are not the thing that cause you to be saved. You don't feel your way in to salvation. So that's the good news there. I want to dig into that and try and bring a proper perspective. And I'm sure it's one that we've all wrestled with, especially new believers, but also long-term believers, because as we see, we go into seasons where it doesn't always feel rosy following after Jesus. So let's dive in. And I think that the first part, most important, if that is your fear, that's your concern, is like, man, I don't really feel emotionally like I'm saved, or when I came to faith, maybe my emotions weren't always right there. It's good to kind of set the foundation. We're not saved by our emotions. We're not saved because we feel passionate about God. Just like we don't earn our salvation, we don't show up and impress God. Everything, our relationship with God, everything in that relationship is a response, is from His grace. Everything else that we do is a response to His grace. So I want to pull that in. We're going to spend a little bit of time in Paul's letter to the Romans, because when we talk about salvation and grace, there are few more clear places to go in the Bible. And Romans chapter 10, verse 9. Paul writes, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, you will be saved. So it's important to know, it's our faith. We trust in God. That's not primarily an emotional exercise. The emotions can connect with that, and we're going to get into that. But, we want to see that salvation comes through faith, right? And that is not just something we feel. That's something that connects with our will, our decision, our mind, and really it's a whole person response. However, we jump back to 9:16, so Romans chapter 9, verse 16, and I'm kind of pick and choosing here. You can go through it and you'll see how it all connects. Paul also writes, says, so then it does not depend on human will or effort, but on God who shows mercy. And I'm pulling that out of a context where he's talking about how, really salvation is God's prerogative, right? So God has chosen us. He has bestowed upon us His grace. He has given us His grace, and we respond to Him in faith, and we are saved, right? So really, this is what we can kind of say brings our salvation. We do have to factor in that we know who God is. We know the means of God's salvation. We know who Christ is, that He died for us. You know, there's a lot of knowing the right stuff and believing the right things because we have to connect with a real God who has real attributes and qualities, and Jesus who's done real things. And we have to, acknowledge that, believe that, and then, put our life on the line for that, right? Our eternal life is on the line for that. So there's a lot of knowledge and willpower involved in that. And that's kind of somewhat separate, somewhat from emotions. If we try and draw some lines in what is a blurry field. So you can go through all that and it might not really come out on an emotional level for you. You can be saved without feelings, right? Maybe if you consider maybe somebody who, maybe not the nicest picture to imagine, but somebody can, understand these truths, believe that they're true, and decide I'm going to trust my eternal life and the forgiveness of my sins and my brokenness on these truths. And then that person could maybe pass away. God will take them up to heaven. They would die, moments later. And maybe that knowledge hadn't worked through their bodies with a lot of emotional response. It doesn't mean that they're not saved. So feelings are not essential. And it's not to say that feelings aren't important. Right? Feelings are important. Actually, in fact, if we think about it just for a second, emotions are a part of our human design. So God has made us with emotions, so they are useful. Emotions do give us knowledge, they give us insight, they can lead us to truth, right? If we follow our emotions, we get to learn about us, about how we feel about things that are true, things that are not true. So feelings are important. But like everything else about us, right, they are affected by the fall. So that means our emotions are not, they are not to be fully trusted in, right? Our emotions can be wrong. Our emotions can be experienced in sinful ways. They can lead us into sinful actions and sinful thoughts and beliefs. Our emotions have to be tested with truth. They are not objectively on their own true. And again, yes, they many times can be wrong. We can have the wrong emotional response to something, but they are important. So overall, what I want to capture at this point then is to say, really, you can be saved and not feel it. Your emotions could be leaning the wrong way about that. You're like, I don't feel saved, but in fact you are. But on the flip side, you can feel saved and actually not be. Right? So our emotions can lead us astray in this. And that was kind of why, or not kind of, that actually was why I originally brought that out on that Sunday when I was preaching. I still remember because I had that concern had really cropped up that week in my heart. I think God had been opening my eyes to some issues that I see in our society today. We are really obsessed with emotions, right? Where we're too far on that side of the pendulum, where it's swinging out wildly with emotions are guiding society and people's decisions way too much. We are becoming unfettered. We've become really unfettered to objective truth, right? And are letting our feelings and our subjectivity just lead us in all sorts of horrible directions, right? And so you see a lot of people now pulling back, and especially in the church. And in our corner of the Christian world, we're in the Reformed corner. We tend to be intellectual people, more head over heart type of people. So really in our camp, you can see a lot of people kind of like just come down hard on emotions, right? Almost as just to counterbalance the way society has just run rampant with emotions. And I want to stress that we need to be careful. We need to balance our connection with emotions, our reading of our emotions, and find a healthy place there, not to shut down emotions entirely. And my fear is that of people who will have an intellectual assent to the gospel and to Christian truth, but actually have that disconnected to the deeper level of their heart. It's like, okay, I can believe this intellectually, but if it's never impacting you on that level of emotion, I worry if you are actually saved. That's my real concern. That's what I was getting at, and I want to dive into that a little bit right now. So, if you don't feel saved, well, we'll get into this in a little bit, but if you don't feel saved, and you've never had an emotional really response to being saved, let's put it that way. You've never had that real emotional response. Not, you felt it in the past and right now you're having a hard time in life and you don't feel saved or you feel far from God. That's a different story. If you've never had like an emotional response to the idea of being saved, then that's something to really question and consider. Are you truly coming before God? And so I want to get into what some of the past giants of the faith said about this topic of emotions, and I think it's really enlightening. Particularly, I like to go with Jonathan Edwards because he was just so intellectual that it shows that it's not just like intellectuals versus I don't know what you call them, people who are more heart over head, people who are more emotionally or intuitively grounded versus people who are more logical and intellectual. Now, Jonathan Edwards, an intellectual giant, but he understood the importance of emotions. And this quote from he wrote, A Treatise Concerning Religious Affections. He writes, "Unless we are influenced by some affection, such as love, hate, desire, hope, or fear, we tend to be lazy. These emotions are like springs that set us moving in all the affairs of life and its pursuits. If all love and hatred, hope and fear, anger, zeal, and affection and desire were taken away, the world would be motionless and dead. And if this is true of worldly affairs, it is also true in matters of faith. The spring of their action lies very much in religious affections. He who has only doctrinal knowledge and theory without affection is never engaged in the goodness of faith." Right? So he's very clear. It's not just an intellectual assent to Christian truths. There's an understanding that there will be an emotional response to this as well. He has a biography, kind of like a story of his coming to faith that he also wrote. And in that journey of faith, he balances that out a little bit more thoroughly. He talks about how originally he had a lot of emotion towards God, towards Christianity. But that he doesn't see that was a time when he was truly saved. It was just an emotional time. And then he kind of transitioned into a time of real just intellectual connection, but it was intellectual and dry. And then he talks about a time where he truly kind of came into true faith. And I think all these things started to flow together. So you see, it's not just one or the other, right? We would expect, if the entirety of us is saved and God has made us with minds, that think and logic and reason, but he also gave us, a body full of emotion, of feeling, of experience, that also is going to be there with the biggest thing that ever happens to an individual, which is coming into connection with God, salvation. J.C. Ryle, another Reformed and evangelical theologian, I'm not going to quote from him, but I know in one of his works called it's escaping me now, Practical Theology, he talks about, or contrasts rather, a formal religion and religion of the heart. And he's writing in the 1800s, and he's really talking out against people who would know the doctrine and would probably live out the ceremony or the external expressions of religion, but don't really have a inner connection with God or the things that they claim to believe. And so he's saying, like, this formality of religion is like a dead religion, and that truly what saves is the deeper reality of the heart. So if you're in that camp where there is no emotion whatsoever, there hasn't been emotion, let's put it that way, there hasn't been emotion, then it's a time to really reconsider and go, what may be blocking that? Are we really connecting to the Lord? In my own personal experience, this didn't happen all at once. In fact, I would say the greater emphasis on emotion and feeling in my walk with faith came, later. I believe I was saved when I came and I prayed and gave my life to Christ, and then was baptized. But it was after that God really put me in a situation where I really experienced a greater depth of emotion. However, I could see in small parts it was leading up to that. But if you just think for a moment, what coming into connection with God through the gospel, what that really kind of means. We're face to face to the things that we've done wrong, right? Our sin, our brokenness. I think really, truly, knowing the mistakes we've made and the people that we've hurt should lead to, that should lead to an emotion, right? There's an emotional response, of feelings of guilt, of inadequacy, of sadness, of sorrow, of grief. That'd be real, and that's an emotion that we would latch into, and then go from that to the weight being lifted off of our shoulders, all of that being taken away, knowing that Jesus died for us and we are truly forgiven, and then experiencing the love that is kind of filling this gap, that in spite of all that we've done to not deserve connection with God, to know that he has desired to bring us into that deep connection through the death of Jesus. Do we experience that love? Is there an emotional response to being loved like that? Again, that, if it starts intellectually, that's normal, I think. And that over time, though, as we meditate on that and we experience that, there should be an emotional response, right? Because in our lives, when people treat us with love, if it's your parents or a spouse or a really close friend, right, that impacts us on some level of the emotion, that feeling of being loved. So no doubt, if we have that genuine relationship with God, that will strike us, that will hit us at some point. And so it's important to know that we've had these emotional experiences that flow out of a true relationship with God. If we're not having that at all, and never have, that's something to really, I think, dig into and question. Are we truly, whether it's acknowledging that we are broken, we're sinners, we've done wrong things, are we truly feeling guilty about that? Do we truly believe we're saved? We're feeling that God has done what he said he has done, that we feel are we feeling that in response to what he has done, the effects of his grace? Do we feel that? We might know it, but has it extended to the rest of us? And that's leading us deeper into connection with God. Of course, though, our emotions, the experience of our emotions, are going to change. We've had bad days, we have good days, we have days where we feel like we're basking in the sun of God's love, right, in the hot rays, and other days, if we've had there's tragedy in our lives or things are just not going well, we can feel like he's very far away. And as we go through life, we go through different seasons, and our emotions are not going to remain stable the same. We're not going to feel our relationship with God the exact same way. His love for us is never going to change. That's a truth that we need to hold on to, right? He is always the same when he shows up in our lives. He's always there, perfect in his attributes, in his love, in his protection, in his providing, in watching over us. All of that stays the same. Our experience, based on our fallibility and just our human nature, means we're going to experience life in different ways. That's normal. Right, that is normal. That's very normal for followers of Jesus. Very normal for the Christian life to at times experience, dryness in our relationship with God. So that coming back to the original question, I don't feel saved. If you're finding there's that dip in your emotional experience while you're walking with the Lord, and you're like, well, you're going through a few weeks to a few months, you're like, I just don't feel the same way, and has God disappeared? Well, the answer is no. And actually, I would say that dryness ever more evidence, because that's part of God's testing. At times, he does that. He tests our faith, which is trusting in him, often in spite of what we can experience and see. So I think that's quite normal. And there's countless brothers and sisters that I've known and spoken through in my own experience as well that has led me to understand that this is a very normal and natural part of following God, that sometimes we're just not going to feel it, and that's okay. That's good. We need that testing, right? Our faith is not meant to be based on good feelings and experiences. That's not how it works. We need to be able to feel the bad stuff and turn to God and say, yes, I I love you, Lord. You are number one, and I give my life to you, even right now when it doesn't feel good. Right? And I trust that you're there, even if I don't feel it. Right? That's belief. We believe even though we don't see, even though we don't feel. That's not what assurance is about. So when we talk about assurance that, am I saved? We never turn to the idea of, do you feel saved today? What's your personal experience with the Lord? It's not the basis of our assurance. And I want to come back to Romans again. Romans 8 this time. In Romans 8, verses 14 to 16, Paul writes, "For those led by God's Spirit are God's sons. For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear. Instead, you received the Spirit of adoption by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies together with our spirit that we are God's children." Wow. There's a bit there that I think is really important when we want to talk about assurance. Right? Salvation is a work from God. Okay? And we are assured of this as we see God in our lives. And if you're looking closely, it doesn't have to be big things. Sometimes you want to see like amazing, incredible things, lifted out of, the gospel stories to wow and shock us. It can only be God. Well, the small stuff is really crucial to pay attention to. I know in my own experience, the fact that I saw myself every morning getting up and wanting to read the Bible and then opening a Bible, within an hour of waking up when I first came to faith, when I had zero real interest in reading the Bible up until that point, like 24 years of not having really an interest in reading the Bible. All of a sudden, I want to figure out what's going on here. I want to get into this book. That little thing is evidence. That was God working in me. That was the Spirit filling me for that moment. And do we see these evidences? Do we see the fruit of the Spirit coming out of our lives? Do we see slow and gradual change? Right? This is God at work. God has worked to save us, and he's now making good on that salvation in our transformation. This is something that assures us, right? And in other parts of the Bible, and other times, if you've heard in some of our sermons, we talk about, it's obedience, really. We see the stepping stones and the growing obedience in our lives. And also, in addition to that, second, we see here that the Spirit himself, this is verse 16, the Spirit himself testifies with our spirit. So our spirit is encouraged that when the Holy Spirit is with us as well, the Spirit is telling us, the Spirit is giving us assurance. And that is almost something that we experience outside of ourselves, that comes from outside of ourselves and into us. Of course, that is something I think we need to learn to listen to. Often we are numb to spiritual things. We often don't hear God or listen well. And as we grow in maturity along our journey of faith, we learn how to hear him and see him more clearly. And I think this assurance of the Spirit grows in us over time. But we come back to that idea, I don't feel saved. Well, do you believe in the gospel? Do you believe that it's true? Intellectually, yes, but does it connect deeper than just in your mind, that you also, you feel the gravity of the things you've done wrong. You feel the release of God's forgiveness, and you feel that he loves you. Like, you put these things together at some point in your journey when you came to faith. Was that real for you? Do you see anywhere in your journey that you've been changing whatsoever? That you've become more like Jesus, even in little ways over time? Well, if you see these evidences, then continue just to follow God. Continue to lean on him in faith and hope. Don't rely on your feelings in the moment, right here, right now. Because you can see, if you look back on your walk, he has been with you, right? And he will continue to guide you, and your experiences will change over time. So again, God has put his work within you, and that is what the great assurance is. And I think we'll see from heart and head everything together at different times, in different seasons, and in different ways, but it will all show up as a very vibrant experience with the Lord. So I hope that encourages you. I hope that's an encouragement, and I hope it provides some guidance to reflect and understand how both emotions and and the intellect do come together in different ways and in different seasons to show us and to help us understand our salvation. And so thanks everyone for listening in. That's going to conclude our time again together with this. This really important question that I was really thankful to receive. If you have any other questions, you feel free to reach us on social media and even just submit questions that we can dig into if you have any. And looking forward to joining you again in our next episode.